There's a good deal of self-analysis that one has to go through after doing those things, you know. The Ziggy Stardust, Aladdin saying "Thin White Children." I mean, I really lived those characters at the time. It was like shock treatment. I'm coming out of doing all those things. I was putting myself psychologically through a very dangerous thing.
Ziggy Stardust was inspired by two figures, Vince Taylor and, most significantly, Iggy Pop. David had met Iggy on a brief promotional visit to New York, where the original punk rocker was playing the most basic, aggressive rock and roll with his band, the Stooges. Abusing himself and his fans, fueled by a narcissistic self-loathing, Iggy was the ultimate holy fool who nevertheless inspired such adulation that he could walk out over the upraised hands of his audiences. David returned to London with visions of a Christ-like rock star who is hailed as a saviour, yet inevitably self-destructs and is crucified by his fans. He was determined to create an album that rejected hippie indulgences in favour of a crisp, clean, futuristic rock and roll sound, returning to the adrenalised appeal of the form's 50s roots, while also creating a brand new sound for a brand new decade. The resulting album, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, was all this and more. Ostensibly a concept album, Ziggy Stardust fails to hang together in any literal sense. Rather, it's the feel of the record that gives it a cohesive quality. Moon Age Daydream, Hang On To Yourself and Suffragette City are simply outrageous sexual rock and rollers, full of thrillingly camp sci-fi nonsense. Little Richard via T-Rex and Buck Rogers. The first two songs had been released already in an earlier form as singles by Arnold Corns, a mythical group made up of schoolboy musicians Runk and one Rudy Valentino, alias clothes designer Freddie Beretti, although Bowie had done the actual singing. The album opens with 5 years. Building from a sparse, aching piano ballad into an epic, anthemic wail of despair and defiance, it sets the scene for the story to come. The world will end in 5 years' time, a prophecy that struck a chord with a disenfranchised generation for whom the hippie dream had failed. The prosperity of the 60s had retreated, and strikes, unemployment and the rise of the IRA made Britain seem a dark, cold, even apocalyptic place. The whole album is simple, direct, aggressive, with crisp handclaps, crunching guitar and a high trebly sound that alienated the older generation of dope-smoking hippies while exciting their younger brothers and sisters, already hooked on Bowie's old rival Mark Bolan and the emerging wave of glitter glam rock groups. Moon Age Daydream announces Bowie's intentions. I'm a space invader, I'm a rock and rolling bitch for you. Mick Ronson's guitar seems to pout and pose as much as Bowie himself, mimicking every teenage crutch thrust, yet crucially avoiding macho, heavy metal virtuosity. Bowie's lyrics are peppered with gay slang, and to promote the album he told melody makers Michael Watts, "I'm gay and always have been." It could have easily backfired, but instead tapped into a largely ignored rock audience, gaining Bowie a loyal gay following as well as those kids who were unsure or simply wanted to shock their parents. Starman summed up Bowie's appeal perfectly. A combination of gay favourite, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and fabulously arch rock and roll boogie. It gave him his first hit since Space Oddity. It also produced a legendary Top of the Pops appearance, which was to inspire a generation of future pop stars, with Bowie placing his arm affectionately around Mick Ronson's shoulder as both sashayed across the stage in lurex and makeup. The album is nothing less than an exercise in self-fulfilling prophecy, with its own built-in obsolescence. On Star, Bowie proclaims, "I could make out all right as a rock and roll star," adding on the fade-out, "Just watch me now." The title track takes its role to its logical conclusion, with the leper messiah inspiring his fans to murder, Charles Manson style. Contrary to popular belief, Ziggy survives, a broken recluse in the manner of Turner, the star of Nick Roeg's 1970 film Performance. In Rock and Roll Suicide, he wanders the lonely streets, dazed and forgotten, yet the image could also be any of Ziggy's bereft fans. and the finale sees them coming together in grand communion. Gimme your hands, you're not alone. The rock concert as salvation. The campaign to promote Ziggy was simple. To become a star, you must act like one. Inspired by Elvis Presley and his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, Bowie and Tony DeFries created a fantasy world in which money was no object. It was as if the album were merely the soundtrack to the life they were intent on living. Although the Ziggy tour began in February 1972 at the Toby Jug pub in Tolworth, 8 months later they were crossing America, accompanied by minders everywhere they went, staying in the finest hotels and signing all bills, RCA records and tapes. It was all an act. Tony DeFries' management company, Main Man, was even staffed by actors from the Warhol-inspired play Pork. Everyone was encouraged to live out their fantasies. The LPs weren't selling in phenomenal quantities, yet Ziggy hysteria seemed to be spreading through the youth like wildfire. And despite the I Am Gay campaign, David freely availed himself of the large number of young female groupies beating a path to his door. Despite the excess, Bowie found time to produce 2 other landmark albums in 1972, Iggy and the Stooges' Raw Power and Lou Reed's Transformer, featuring, on Walk on the Wild Side, his old saxophone tutor Ronnie Ross. He also produced Mott the Hoople's All the Young Dudes, donating to it the title track. And in 1973, out of the experiences of his American tour, he released what was effectively Ziggy Part 2, Aladdin Sane. If Ziggy was the prediction, then Aladdin Sane was the document, and a sign that maybe Bowie had had enough. Echoing Ziggy's mix of rock and roll, doo-wop and West Side Story, the sound was harder, less playful, as though this time they were doing it for real. Drive-In Saturday imagined a post-sexual future, while even the Rolling Stones' Let's Spend the Night Together sounded alienated and freaked out. The title track, influenced by Christopher Isherwood, suggested that the decadence of the era could prefigure a Third World War, at the same time making explicit the schizophrenic, insecure nature of the Ziggy character. Who will love Aladdin Sane? Bowie asks, over Mike Garson's fractured jazz piano. Nevertheless, both the fans and Bowie's backing band were shocked and surprised when on July 3, 1973, Bowie announced his retirement on stage at the Hammersmith Odeon. In effect, the Spiders from Mars were being given the sack. They had been hired to play a part, and when the show was over, Bowie had always intended to break up the band. For Trevor, Woody and Mick, it was back to Hull, to mundane life and council houses with gold discs on the wall, while David was already moving on.
I always find it very inhibiting to go back and keep referring to older work because you kind of instinctively start dragging up the luggage of the older work and it starts appearing in the new work. And I really don't have any interest in doing that. I really have always felt, well, I've done that, let's go somewhere else now. And it is selfish in a way because I know that an audience often expects to hear the things from the past, to sort of, whether it's to qualify their kind of loyalty to you or whatever, that those things really do exist and they want to hear them.
Bowie's first album of 1971, The Man Who Sold the World, opened with a tour de force of hard rock guitar and metaphysical imagery, the width of a circle. A rejection of mysticism, gurus and easy answers in favour of personal self-knowledge, it culminated in a terrifying approximation of Terry's schizophrenic visions 4 years earlier. In 1969, Terry had been committed to the brooding Cane Hill Mental Asylum, a grim Victorian pile out on the edge of London. The album's second track was All the Madmen. Day after day, they send my friends away, to mansions cold and grey, Bowie sang before identifying with the inmates, concluding, "They're all as sane as me." On the title track, Bowie encounters an eerie figure that could easily be his brother. David's guilt centres on the concept that Terry's cursed affliction could easily have befallen him. Yet instead, he was spared to follow his ambitions, but at what cost? And in turning his personal inner landscape into profit, was Bowie himself the man who sold the world. The Man Who Sold the World is a dark, paranoid album in which Bowie's personal mythology is described in terms of the science fiction writings of William Burroughs and H.P. Lovecraft. Musically, it combines screaming heavy rock with haunting folk melodies and archaic musical refrains. The band responsible, christened The Hype by Bowie, were Mick Ronson on guitar and Woody Woodmansey on drums, both drawn from Hull combo The Rats, and producer Tony Visconti on bass. The group had also been making outrageous live appearances, clad in gaudy superhero costumes produced at all-night sewing sessions at Haddon Hall. The original sleeve of The Man Who Sold the World was a cartoon commissioned by Bowie from Mike Weller, an old Beckenham Arts Lab colleague, showing a gun-toting cowboy in front of Cane Hill. David then, however, came up with a second cover, showing him reclining on a couch at Haddon Hall wearing a full-length floral dress. "It's a man's dress," he later explained. The controversial dress cover was only used in the UK and was later replaced by a Ziggy-era photo, while the cartoon sleeve was produced for the US audience. David, forgetting he'd originally commissioned the design, was outraged, and this contributed to his decision to get out of his Mercury contract and release his second album of 1971, Hunky Dory, on RCA. Fighting David's corner was Tony DeFries, an American lawyer who was gradually taking over his business affairs from Ken Pitt. Bowie was concerned that his personal relationship with Pitt could harm his career, and rather than deal with the situation face to face, he simply stopped seeing Pitt, communicating with him only through legal letters. Eventually, Bowie, DeFries and Pitt had a meeting in which Pitt agreed to relinquish his managerial role. For Hunky Dory, Rats bassist Trevor Bolder rejoined his old cohorts, and with Rick Wakeman on keyboards, the album was musically much less harsh than its predecessor. Changes was a stuttering, piano-led show tune that ruminated on questions of identity and mortality, while Life on Mars was simultaneously a parody of My Way, for which David had originally been asked to rewrite the English lyrics, eventually turned down in favour of Paul Anka's, another bitter love song for Hermione, and an anthem of existential doubt for the whole human race. Oh You Pretty Things, which Bowie originally gave to Peter Noone of Herman's Hermits, rewrote John Wyndham's novel The Midwich Cuckoos for the rock and roll era. It posited the idea of teenagers as a new, alien race, ready to take over from their elders, while also containing further references to Terry's schizophrenic visions. Kooks celebrated the birth of David and Angie's son, Zowie, and there were song tributes to 3 of David's heroes, Andy Warhol, Bob Dylan and Lou Reed. The LP's strangest, darkest track, however, was The Bewley Brothers, which seemed once more to refer to David and Terry. In the song, Terry is left dead on the rocks, while David is a cross-dressing, drug-using bisexual, which he sees as a symptom of some residual family insanity. A dance with madness, it takes us back to The Width of a Circle, and again evokes the spectre of Terry that continued to haunt Bowie's songwriting. Sex, violence, schizophrenia, alienation, betrayal, and the struggle to stay in control. The themes that would dominate Bowie's career were already clearly established.